Hello, everyone. Hi, Roddy. So great to connect with you today and to have this conversation. A really important topic. We've spoken about it a few times before. Question of future of work and how we as individuals and uh, how can organizations make sure that there is that sense of resilience, whether it's in our day-to-day life and work and on the overall organizational team level. Really looking forward to our conversation today and hearing your wisdom around the subject.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Roddy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, my background was originally in business, and then because of the roles that I played, I then, when I was made redundant, I became a business coach. And I was working in central London, being a business coach, really enjoying it until one of my clients told me they had suicidal thoughts. This was a key executive or a key director of a very large multinational insurance company. And I didn't really know how to deal with it other than to try and get this individual to go and see a doctor. And that's exactly what we managed to do. And just to finish that story off, he actually, after about 3 months, came back to work and to all intents and purposes was certainly on the road to recovery. But it made me realize that I lacked certain skill sets. I might have had the business knowledge and knowledge about relationships and everything else, but I didn't have the mental health and well-being knowledge. So I took a sabbatical. I did a degree in integrated psychotherapy and counseling, and then started working primarily with corporates, and initially with the NHS, running mental health and well-being programs, and then running resilience, how to build and develop resilience, but primarily using science and really creating the why it's really important to do certain things. And knowing the why gives you a kind of foundation to then go, how do I do this? And this really was an interest. It's more of a mission or a passion for me to look at the science behind best practice, and then to spread the word, if you like, about how you can use the science and use best practice to improve your health and well-being, but also your resilience to pressure. So it's a kind of like using resilience to pressure, but also having the capability to perform. So that's kind of where I'm at. And as I say, one of my major clients is the NHS, and I work with a number of NHS trusts and clinical commissioning groups.
Yeah, and the subject of bringing well-being and resilience and the awareness of it into organizations, I think it's incredibly important right now, and that's something that really relates to the sort of work I do as an organizational psychologist in the space of employee engagement and well-being and creating lasting cultures. I do base my approach on the simple realization and the fact that we spend at least 1/3 of our lives at work. Another 1/3 we probably spend sleeping, another 1/3 hopefully not worrying about our work. And it's so important for us to connect as professionals in organizational change, in business psychology, in coaching, to discuss together what's the future of work like, what sort of future we want to create for our planet, for our society, for the world of work, and how we can best do that and spread the message. Roddy, I really look forward to our conversation about resilience in individuals and organizations today. And to start, something we've been talking about quite a bit is the subject of well-being at work and high performance, well-being in high-performing teams, and the impact of personal energy on how people are. I'd love to hear your thoughts, the sort of things that you've mentioned before in our conversations about what's the state of it right now and what do you believe is the way forward for it?
Okay, well, thank you. There's lots of evidence now showing, and in fact, we've just gone through, and still going through COVID-19, and that pandemic has meant that a lot of the future of work has been speeded up somewhat. I remember talking to one of my corporate clients about doing some virtual sessions with their teams rather. And they kind of were very reticent about doing anything like that because they didn't think that virtual had a place. We now see, unfortunately, because of circumstance, that virtual presentations do have a place. In fact, we're doing a virtual presentation now. And in fact, technology has increased dramatically to enable us to do this in a way that engages individuals to maybe take action. And I see the way forward is very much not so much just about learning, but about changing individuals' behaviors. Because for me, certainly, and for a lot of experts in the marketplace, the future of work is going to change dramatically. We have actually seen evidence from various bodies about how with automation, the Internet of Things, robotics, artificial intelligence, all these things are changing the way we work and also changing the relationships we have with people. So in a nutshell, we're really looking at how, as an individual and as teams, we now work. So forget about the classic hierarchy in an organization and relationships within those organizations. Think now about networks inside and outside of organizations. But to enable you to do that, you start looking at the roles that probably will exist. And in fact, a lot of the evidence coming through from, certainly from some of the scientific research that people are doing, the evidence is actually showing that the kind of roles that people are going to do is one, if you like, what I like to call is specific core roles. So these might be coders or people that write artificial intelligence programs. The other is very much a generalist, where you have a situation where people are going to have to be able to adapt their behavior and adapt the way they work and flex with the pressures that come in. So whereas you can ask Google, for example, or Alexa certain questions and get the answer, if you think of artificial intelligence as kind of coming in and taking over that, what you also need to now think of is, how do I now communicate with other networks? How do I improve those levels of communications and also look after myself at the same time? I was reading only yesterday some evidence about how with COVID-19, loneliness has increased, and that indeed, and incidentally, it's loneliness from work. It's not necessarily loneliness in the sense of a social loneliness, although that exists as well. But this loneliness from work and the working environment has created certain mental health issues or mental wellness issues. So when we start looking at how we might move forward, it's my firm belief that if we can base it on science about what we know now and what we will learn as we go forward, and I like to call them power skills, that we all have a kind of responsibility ourselves to take the opportunity that the future of work will bring. But at the same time, have a culture, and I know we're going to discuss this later on, but have a culture of wellness. So these power skills would be looking at things like how you can regulate your emotions. And for example, you can do this with heart rate variability, changing your heart rate variability and achieving a level of coherence. And there's lots of science behind this now. It's also about looking at behavioral preferences. So if you know how being self-aware of yourself, and importantly, are able to understand how other people's behavioral preferences are, then you might be able to flex your behavior and improve the communication you have. And so behavioral profiling and being able to do that in the moment, rather than filling in a massive form every time you meet someone, might be a good way forward. But we also know about the importance of sleep and how sleep, again, can affect not just levels of obesity, but also cognitive thinking, risk-taking, all these things that the science of sleep is now showing us. And we can't do anything unless we actually form habits. So do we have good habits, or are we kind of in that kind of negative habit? And incidentally, again, looking at some of the science and research, there's 1,400 biochemical changes between a positive and a negative emotion. 1,400, and that has implications, not just to health and well-being, but also to cognitive ability. So if you think of that, and you think about also about how mindfulness is now coming into organizations and the science behind mindfulness, how it can change your structure of your brain, and how important an innovative mindset is as the organization changes and as the world changes. All these power skills, as I'd like to call them, are really, really important. And the synergy of all those power skills will determine how you perform and how you can be resilient to pressure. So hopefully that kind of explains a little bit of my of where I'm at, if you like. And I just enjoy sharing the science behind this and watching people kind of get it and changing their behavior to take advantage of what the way forward seems to be.
Yeah, Roddy, this really makes sense. And I think especially what's standing out for me there is that you emphasize the importance of having a more systemic approach of understanding how things are and appreciating the fact that organizational performance is related to team performance, is related to individual experiences and how a person feels as an individual about themselves, what sort of chemicals are affecting their response to different situations, how does their physical and mental well-being affect then how they are when they work together as a team, when they are striving to achieve their career goals, and how is that then affecting the overall world environment and society by extension. And we need to have understanding and appreciation of all of those things at the same time. You've mentioned measuring that through heart rate monitors. That's something that I think really interesting when you talk about your expertise in that. I come from background in measuring organizational performance based on employee engagement surveys and understanding how quantitative and qualitative data help organizations make better decisions. I think the main takeaway from me in this is that there are so many ways of measuring things. We need to be careful with how we measure things, with how we interpret things, and we should always remember that all the things work as one integrated system. It's complex, and that's fine. There is no other way around it. The modern world is complex. The system is complex, and we cannot say that how an individual isn't going to affect organizations and society, and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really valid point, but it's interesting. It just struck me when you're talking about the organization systems, how the human system also has to function in a level of balance or homeostasis.
Yes.
And then we mentioned heart rate variability. Well, if you can actually change the way or regulate your emotions using a technique to change your heart rate variability, and that increases cognitive function and lessen or gives you more control over your emotional regulation, that can only be a really good thing. And if you were able to then measure it before and after, in fact, during some of my sessions, quite often what we'll do is we'll measure an individual's levels of coherence before we start the program, and then after the program, we'll then measure it again. And just by using the technique, the change in their levels of coherence in a positive way is dramatic, absolutely dramatic. And there's lots of data, showing thousands of people that have been on the training courses that show levels of, 42% reduction in anxiety and depression, increase in cognitive function and focus, better sleep quality, all these things that we can now measure, and not just by self-report, but we can now measure. And I think this is the way forward that perhaps the organization, in realizing that to have high performing teams, you need to have a level of well-being in those teams. Mm-hmm. Because a tired and wired workforce are not going to be able to adapt as well as a workforce that is resilient to pressure and has the capability to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. And this also brings us to the point that there are things that organizations need to do to realize and empower its workforce, its people, to perform at their best while taking into account not just organizational objectives, but individual performance and the simple fact that everyone is human and we're not just here to be working and making money, but we also have our goals, needs, and sometimes some people may be in different situations and may have different needs and priorities when it comes to their physical or mental well-being. But there, when we talk about empowering people to take care of their health, there's also an important question that sometimes a person needs to do the education and be able themselves to understand how they're feeling, how they can better talk about their feelings, perhaps with their manager in the company, and whether they feel comfortable talking about that. And I think something in your work that's really important is making sure that people have the power and I guess the language and the data to take responsibility of their behaviors and their well-being.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, I don't know if you've read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, but basically one of the key lessons, or one of the key lessons I think I took from that, is that you're responsible for your own emotions, that you can't blame other people by how you react. You have the control of that. And yet, so often you hear individuals say things like, he made me do this, or she made me do that, and the organization makes me do this. Well, certainly there are situations where you have to make difficult decisions, and sometimes the implication there is that you have to make these difficult decisions that might not be in your best interest. But by and large, nobody really makes you do anything. You still have the choice to say no, or you still have the choice to say yes, this is what I'm doing. And I think it ties back to values. And we just have to look, for example, at climate change and what's actually happening with climate change, and how you have one faction who have their own interests and another faction has another set of interests. And you can see the two factions believing in their own values and believing in information that they're receiving. But really, when you start looking at it, isn't it about compromise, about bringing these things in and using things like appreciative inquiry and collaborating to try and find, if not a middle ground, but maybe to understand the other person's perspective rather than the kind of head-to-head. And also, I think it's about being human is part of working in groups. It's not working in isolation. And I think this whole thing about taking responsibility, it's about not just about taking responsibility for yourself. It's more also about taking responsibility for your team, for your organization, for your society, and for the world in general. Because if you don't do this, well, why would you expect someone else to do it? And I think developing coherence, where you're actually a lot more cognitive and you're a lot more in touch with your feelings rather than just reacting, then if everyone had an ability to develop their own coherence, even if you have negative people, and use the word negative in a broad sense, but people that perhaps look at different viewpoints that are maybe pulling team morale down, if you have lots of the team actually being very positive and truly positive, not just saying positive things, but really believing in positive emotions, then that hopefully would raise that level, the team's level of performance up, because of that level of can do, rather than why we can't do something. So again, all the time when I'm talking about empowering people to take responsibility for their behaviors, it's a double-edged sword. It's one that's looking at the ability to perform, but similarly, it's also the ability to look after yourself. And in fact, working with the NHS, I often talk about something called compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue, where individuals have basically had a situation where they're caring for others, and they can see, particularly during COVID, at this terrible time, people in the front line are seeing, trauma in other humans, and you think, well, this is, they're able then to see this, but what people don't realize is quite often this trauma is then transferred back to themselves, and to be able to have a resilience so that seeing these traumas is not going to affect you as an individual, your own personal well-being is kind of really fundamental. And people you can see not just in the NHS, but also around the world and in different organizations getting burnout because of compassion fatigue. The more burnt out they are, the more the vicious circle becomes, the more they don't sleep, the more they eat, the more they might eat more or become more irritable. The more they do that, the relationships kind of break down. When that breaks down, they can't sleep. And then this vicious circle just continues. So developing coherence is, for me, certainly is the kind of platform where everything else can then be built on. And unless you have coherence in yourself, you can't then start talking about developing teams and communicating in a proper and coherent way.
Yep. Yes, and I think what's really important here, and you've touched on that, is having a shared language, having a shared understanding and the way of talking about things that can help us develop coherence. That's where you need data, that's where you need to understand what's going on. Now, okay, I'm experiencing this set of negative, troubling emotions. There is a name for that. There is a name for that, and those are the people I can reach out to for help. And that's how we can have conversations about those, because sometimes people may not even have a conversation about something because they don't have the words to describe what they may be going through, and because they've never had the exposure to this, they don't know how to bring it up. They think maybe it's just me who is experiencing that, because they have never spoken with anyone, because they don't have the language for that. So sort of streamlining, making sure that everyone has the common language and the common understanding of those are the things that may be happening in our profession, in our society. That's how we can tackle them, and that's what we can do to work together with that. And I think this really brings us to talking about what are the approaches, what are the new ways for organizations and individuals to create better cultures that are focused on people, on well-being, on creating a better world with that new coherence in place. What are your thoughts about that? What are some of the suggestions, perhaps? Obviously, it's a very complex topic, but some of the things that organizations can implement right now and things to be looking for in the future?
Well, one of the things that organizations can be looking at right now is enabling members of staff to take responsibility. Again, I know we've kind of covered this already, but we do have in lots of organizations, big organizations, employment assistance programs, and even in small organizations, there's a kind of culture where you can come and talk. But unless you have collaborative culture where, and can I just say, it's not just in work. When I was once coaching, one of my clients who wanted me to coach their board, the CEO said, well, I don't want you talking about anything to do with private lives. I only want you to concentrate on what's happening here at work. And before my jaw completely dropped to the floor, I said, well, that doesn't kind of work, because what's happening in someone's private life will invariably spill over into their work life, and vice versa, incidentally. And the key thing here is when we start looking at collaborative approaches, the key thing here is collaborative. Everyone has to be in agreement that there's an end goal or a vision, and that ties into values. It also ties in to and part of those values is a desire to develop, and grow. And as humans, we do have that desire to learn and to grow. We wouldn't have invented the computer or the internet, for example. So without that desire to say, well, what next? What else can I do? What next? But some people don't necessarily are quite happy to follow, and we need followers. But the people that are the followers also have to be aware about where we're going. Because following blindly, is a bit like lemons jumping off a cliff. You have to know where you're going. And hence, when I talk about, let's take mindfulness as an example. Many years ago, when I was talking about mindfulness and the benefits of mindful meditation, for example, and the science behind it, quite a lot of people thought this was a little bit fuzzy, a little bit wellbeing, tree huggy. But when they started seeing the science, they kind of got it. I mean, particularly, and obviously some of the CEOs I've coached, they got it. They thought, well, you know what? If I can calm my mind, I might be able to see different perspectives, because we're constantly on a treadmill. But sometimes we just need to just kind of like stop and go, right, okay, am I heading in the right direction, or I'm just running out of control? I'm on a bike with no brakes going downhill, or am I actually in total control of where I'm going? So collaborative culture for me is very much about not just networks in the organization and networks at home, but also collaborating with other organizations and being open for the greater good to share. I mean, we're quite often in situations where people and organizations in particular, and I understand why, in protecting intellectual property, and there has to be some guards behind that. But also there's a kind of greater good that we need to look at, where if we can collaborate with others, then, using synergy as an example, and using synergy of power skills, for example, is an even greater example. If you were to go shopping when you were hungry, what your shopping basket would look like. Well, the energy relationship there is, because you're hungry, you're going to put more in. But if you're on a diet, or if you want to eat healthy, then the impact of your habitual shopping when you're hungry could be quite devastating to your end goal. So you can't just have an idea or a vision that you want to eat healthily without having the proper habits, without actually seeing how those habits can be maintained, without having the knowledge behind what you should be eating. So all these things is collaborative in the sense of all the different skill sets that one would need to have, but also collaborative when we start looking at individuals about how they relate, not just to wellness, not just to performance, but also to how they relate to relationships and relationships with themselves, being more self-aware, but also the impact they have, or emotional intelligence they have, to be able to relate to others and in a way that others can also understand their perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, Roddy. There's so many things that are just incredibly important to understand, and you've mentioned an interesting point that it's like when we talk about it, like we're talking about it right now, when we see the data, when we read about it, we get it. Yes, having a quieter, more relaxed mind, more mindful practices can be incredibly important. Having healthy habits can be incredibly important, but it's so easy to remember that in the day-to-day routine, especially when there are conflicting priorities, especially when there is so much going on. And in part, like you mentioned this a bicycle allusion, I think that's very interesting. It's like there is the sort of first level where many of us spend lots of our time is being on a bicycle going downhill without any pedals, and just letting it control and sort of reacting to whatever are the bumps and trying to avoid them not to fall off completely. And the next level, what mindfulness training can help us with, is making sure that we have those controls. We can understand what's going on. We can preempt, or we can not react so much, and maybe we can go to a ground that's has less of a slope, and how we can do that, and having a bit more control over our lives. And I think the next level after that is understanding that there is no bicycle. There is no way to strive. Reality is neutral. It's our perception of reality, something that you've mentioned earlier. It's our perception of reality that's affecting how we are reacting to everything. That's how we see and we judge things or relationships or events as negative or positive, but in the end of the day, everything is neutral, everything is just out there. But understanding that in a world that's so connected, that's so complex with its systems, that's so reactive, can be really challenging. Now, I think the big point in here is, first off, we need to be having conversations about it, because when we have conversations about it, most people get it immediately. Yeah, I get it. It's not tree huggy or something. Yes, get it. We need to bring in data, especially into organizations, into boardrooms, to help businesses understand that there is also a business case behind well-being, behind treating its people better, and behind creating better experiences for everyone. And there is a case of bringing in that understanding of the importance of collaboration and openness, and having a shared language about mental well-being on the universal scale.
Yeah, and I think also it's about the realization that to change someone's behavior, they must want to change it first. And we're not talking about changing personality or anything. We're actually really talking about behavior and the impact that behavior has. So, you know, when just listening again to you talking about data science, if you're able to use data to measure, because if, you know, any consultant will always talk to you about, you know, monitor, measure, manage. Isn't that the isn't that the 3 M's or something? And I'm not a data scientist, but I know that, you know, if we can measure things and we can manage them, importantly, and monitor how we do, then as a society, then we're going to be able to move in the direction we want to move to. And again, I come back to it. It's great to have well-being culture, but you still also need performance, because we can all be going to yoga retreats every day, but who would then produce the food? Who would then produce the science and the ways forward? We need the products, the services. We all need to realize the fact that well-being is really important, but also we also need to grow as individuals, and it's not just growing in a well-being sense, although that's really, really vitally important. It's also in how we can perform in a way that doesn't tax us to the extent that we're burnt out, that we're resilient to that pressure, yet have the capability to perform.
Yes, Roddy, absolutely. There is so much to think about. Can you please share how can our listeners get in touch with you? How can they find out more about the work that you do?
Sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so by all means, just contact me on LinkedIn. There's I'm there under Roddy Macmillan Herbert, so please just connect. You can also connect via the company website, which is 𝗕𝗂𝘀𝗶𝗵𝗏.com. But I would suggest my email address is roddy@𝗕𝗂𝘀𝗶𝗵𝗏.com, and please reach out to me. I'm really, really happy to share what knowledge I have, and if it can be a benefit to anyone, then I'm really happy that that's the case.
Thank you, Roddy. And as for me, you can get in touch with me through LinkedIn and my email, as well as my website, businesspurposecoaching.com. I have more recordings of conversations like this one with experts in neuroscience, in HR and talent management, and data science, and all other amazing walks of life on my YouTube channel, Business Purpose. And I look forward to joining you, Roddy, and others for those future conversations. Thank you, Roddy, and thank you everyone for listening.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.